So I wanted to say a little bit about preaching, because this is something that I was kind of drawn into teaching 20 odd years ago with the role that I had then. I hadn't really expected to do this, but it was a subject that greatly interested me. And as I've been in ministry for a while, I was a practicing preacher and still am. And of course, it follows on very nicely from the last thing we've been thinking about, what is the gospel? Now, I hope that I will not just launch into a sermon as I start to talk about preaching. I'll try and restrain myself from doing that. But as we think about our task of continuing to share the good news of God today with all and sundry, I think we have to think about this very broadly. So for a start, preaching as we know it, as we're familiar with the concept of somebody standing in a pulpit or with a microphone in front of a church congregation and speaking in a monologue for 20 or 30 or whatever minutes, that's only just a tiny proportion of what Christian communication is all about. Nonetheless, what we do in those public moments is really important, because quite a lot of people are there to hear it. And that message can then spill out, and it can have an influence on people far beyond what they take away immediately on that particular Sunday morning or whenever. And of course, when people have been sharing the gospel in recorded talks and live Zoom services and so on during the lockdown, it's amazing how many people have been tuning into those. Who knows what kind of effect that may have. So when we think about preaching, whether you who may be watching this, you may be a preacher, or you may listen to sermons, or you may never even bother to think about it, or think that a sermon is worth listening to. What's involved in this process? What are we doing? What do we think we're doing? Well, the writers on preaching often list different kinds of preaching, like expository, topical, narrative, prophetic preaching, and so on. But I don't think any list like that really captures the variety of ways that God has used and continues to use individuals to share his word. And many sermons end up being a mixture of styles, and that's fine. I think the key thing is whether that the message that we have to share is being presented in a way that a range of hearers have a fair chance of hearing and receiving it. Now, as soon as you start speaking to a group of people, even if it's only a small group, 5 or 10, certainly if you're going to speak to 100 or 200 or thousands, as our college founder C.H. Spurgeon did, as soon as you start speaking to a group, different dynamics come into play. And if we're being faithful to our calling, we have to think about those dynamics. How can a range of hearers really hear this message? What will be off-putting for some? What will really help some to grasp what I'm saying? What will be a kind of illustration or story which will engage people's minds? And although there's so much that we can say in a sermon, we have so much to talk about. We have, a 66-book long Bible for a start. And we have the whole range of the world's problems and challenges to come to grips with somehow, to gain a Christian perspective on. I have so much to say, but we need to remain focused on what is going to be the good news from God, the heart of this sermon. How are people going to hear God's loving call and his loving challenge to us through this message that I'm preaching? So I think that's, for me, at the heart of what we're doing and how we should think about different approaches to preaching. It's not about choosing one or other method off a peg. It's how can we authentically communicate that gospel message in a way that's relevant and applied to the people who are actually going to hear it in a way that they can hear.